From burning oil wells, turning day into night, to a retreating army wiped out on a single stretch of highway that would earn a haunting nickname, to a decision at the very end of this war that would come back to haunt America a decade later. This is the Gulf War Explained, the 100-hour ground war that reshaped the entire Middle East, and a choice made in its final hours that nobody saw the consequences of yet. Let's rewind, because this war didn't start with tanks. It started with debt and a bad temper. By 1990, Iraq was broke. Saddam Hussein had just spent 8 brutal years fighting Iran, and Iraq came out the other side owing billions, much of it to its oil-rich neighbor, Kuwait. Saddam wanted that debt forgiven. Kuwait said no. Worse, Saddam accused Kuwait of slant drilling across the border and stealing Iraqi oil, and of flooding the market with cheap oil to keep prices low, which was strangling Iraq's already wrecked economy. So on August 2nd, 1990, Saddam did what dictators with big armies and bigger grudges do. He invaded. Roughly 100,000 Iraqi troops rolled across the border, and within a single day, Kuwait's tiny military was overwhelmed and the royal family fled into exile. Saddam annexed the entire country, calling it Iraq's 19th province. Sir, this is a huge problem, and it got worse fast, because Saddam also rounded up thousands of foreign nationals caught in Kuwait and Iraq when the invasion hit, and started placing groups of them at Iraqi military sites as human shields, hoping it would deter coalition airstrikes. For months, the world watched hostage footage of Saddam awkwardly patting a terrified British child on the head for the cameras. It wouldn't fully resolve until Saddam released them all that December, months before a single shot of the actual war was fired. And it was. Because Kuwait didn't just border Iraq, it bordered Saudi Arabia, home to some of the largest oil reserves on Earth. If Saddam kept rolling south, he could control roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply overnight. President George H.W. Bush drew a hard line publicly, declaring, "This will not stand." But privately, there was a much bigger question hanging over the entire White House. One that wouldn't get answered for months. Could America actually build a coalition large enough and get the United Nations on board fast enough to reverse this without triggering something far worse? Bush spent the next several months doing something almost unheard of, building an actual global coalition. Not just America and Britain, but Egypt, Syria, France, and even Saudi Arabia itself agreed to host hundreds of thousands of foreign troops on its soil. A genuinely massive gamble for a Gulf monarchy. All told, 35 nations joined in. The UN gave Saddam a deadline, January 15th, 1991, to withdraw or face war. Saddam ignored it. So on January 17th, Operation Desert Storm began, and it opened with one of the most devastating air campaigns in military history. Stealth bombers, cruise missiles, and precision-guided weapons America had barely used in combat before hammered Iraqi command centers, air defenses, and communication lines for nearly 6 straight weeks. Coalition aircraft flew over 100,000 sorties, and Iraq never even saw it coming. F-117 stealth fighters slipped through their entire air defense network completely undetected on their opening strikes. Iraq's air force barely got off the ground, and much of what did simply fled across the border into Iran rather than fight. But not everyone made it back from that first night. Navy pilot Scott Spiker was shot down over western Iraq just hours into the campaign, the very first American combat death of the war. He was quickly declared killed in action. Except years later, satellite photos and buried wreckage told a murkier story, and the Pentagon quietly reclassified him missing in action. Then, eventually, a prisoner of war. Holding out hope he might still be alive somewhere inside Iraq. His fate stayed an open question for over 15 years. a single pilot lost on night 1, until his remains were finally recovered and identified in the Iraqi desert in 2009. Nearly 2 decades after he vanished, but Saddam had one card left, and he played it in a way nobody fully expected. He started firing Scud missiles, not just at coalition troops, but directly at Israel, a country not even part of the war. His hope was brutally simple: provoke Israel into retaliating, turn this into an Arab versus Israel conflict instead of a coalition versus Iraq one, and shatter the Arab nations right out of Bush's coalition overnight. For weeks, Israel absorbed missile strike after missile strike and, remarkably, held back. American Patriot missile batteries were rushed in specifically to shoot Scuds down and give Israel a reason not to retaliate. It worked, barely, and the coalition held together. But how close that whole alliance actually came to collapsing over those missiles is something most people telling this story skip right past. By late February, with Iraq's army pounded relentlessly for weeks from the air, morale collapsing and supply lines cut, the ground invasion finally launched on February 24th. And what followed stunned military analysts worldwide. Coalition forces, led by General Norman Schwarzkopf, executed a massive flanking maneuver through the desert, what reporters nicknamed the left hook, swinging deep around Iraqi lines instead of hitting them head-on. Iraqi forces, already demoralized and cut off from supplies, surrendered by the tens of thousands, sometimes to nothing more than a single journalist with a camera. As Iraqi troops fled north out of Kuwait, retreating along a single highway packed bumper to bumper with tanks, trucks, buses, and stolen loot ripped straight out of Kuwaiti homes and stores, coalition aircraft caught the entire convoy trapped and exposed with nowhere to scatter. Wave after wave of airstrikes hit the stalled column for hours. What happened next became known as the Highway of Death, a stretch of road turned into a graveyard of thousands of burned-out twisted vehicles stretching for miles. Images so brutal that some in Washington actually pushed to end the war early, rather than let the images keep airing. And as they retreated, Iraqi troops set fire to hundreds of Kuwaiti oil wells out of pure spite. Over 600 wells in total, turning the desert sky black at noon for months afterward. Firefighting crews from around the world descended on Kuwait afterward, just to cap them one by one, a process that took nearly a year to finish. It remains one of the largest environmental disasters ever caused deliberately in wartime. On February 28th, just 100 hours after the ground war began, Bush declared a ceasefire. Kuwait was free. It was, by almost any measure, one of the fastest, most lopsided military victories of the modern era. But here's the choice nobody in that room thought twice about, until it did. Bush chose not to push on to Baghdad and remove Saddam from power. The coalition's mandate was to liberate Kuwait, not conquer Iraq, and pushing further risked shattering the very alliance that had just won the war. So Saddam stayed in power, bruised but alive. The Gulf War killed roughly 300 coalition troops and left an estimated 20,000 to 35,000 Iraqi soldiers dead. It restored Kuwait's sovereignty, cemented America as the world's dominant military power after the Cold War, and gave the world its first real look at precision warfare broadcast live on television. But Saddam Hussein was still sitting in his palace, bruised, humiliated, but very much alive. And somewhere in that unfinished ending sat the seed of a war his son George W. Bush would launch 12 years later, once he made it to the same Oval Office his father had just left.